We're talking today about blended families. In fact, when you get into before, one of the ways people end up in blended families is as a result of divorce, but there are certain adjustments that have to be made when people get divorced, and those adjustments are not always the easiest of adjustments. They're not always the most comfortable, because they involve a lot of people, and the number of people who are involved, and the number of relationships that are affected, and what it does to us does not always make it the easiest relationship to get into. The second one, that where we end up being in blended families. So it's important that when we think about blended families, or we think about people getting divorced, and today we do so with grace. And so today I'm going to try my best to talk to three groups of people. I'll talk to people who are divorced, or divorcing, or divorced, or going through that. And of course, there may be an element of, well, don't really think you can say much about that, because it's a tough one. To be divorced is a tough one. And yes, it is. We'll talk about that. And also to talk to people who may be in the church, who may not be divorced themselves, but feel that they wish they could assist. They wish they knew how to minister to people, or to reach out to people who are divorced, because sometimes we can make situations that could have been okay, we can make them horrible. We can, not even intentionally, simply because of how we respond to something we were not aware of, something we did not know. So that's what I'd like to talk about. Now, one of the things we have to factor in is that divorce does involve loss. It does. And it also involves change. And when we talk about loss and change, one of the things that we have to think about, that we don't always think about, is the changes that people go through that they may not have anticipated. And sometimes, as people looking outside, from outside in, we are not always the most helpful, even when we are close, even when we mean well, even when we are leaders of the church, or brothers and sisters in Christ. We don't always get it right. And so I'm hoping that we'll touch on some few things today that will hopefully make everybody else's life easier as we help them, or as we are part of their lives when they navigate life after divorce. First of all, divorce brings about a loss and change in marriage. And you may think that's obvious. Yes, it is obvious. First thing is the marital status changes. I've spoken to a number of people in a number of sessions where the very fact that you are now divorced, that's what you're going to sign in the form, in of itself is something you need to get used to, something that hits you. It's a shock. You may have known it. It starts from the day of the divorce itself. You may have known that it's going to happen. It's on a particular day, but on the day that it actually happens, it hits you in a different way, because it becomes a reality. And sometimes, even if you thought you were okay with it, you may find yourself breaking down. You may find yourself crying. You may find yourself being very emotional and not understanding why, because sometimes you are the one who wanted it, and you just simply cannot understand, why is it that this is an issue when I'm the one who wanted it? And so, yes, the status changes. And it's not just on the forms you have to fill. It's who you are to yourself. Because as Sister Connie mentioned earlier on, I think we were still off air then, that the reality is that nobody gets married. Well, not nobody, but generally people don't Don't get married in order to divorce. There are few people who do so because of some fraudulent things. They want to get money, but that's not the point. That's not the point we're dealing with today. We're dealing with people who generally get married and want to do so for keeps. And so it is a loss, the fact that you are now divorced and you did not see yourself as somebody who would be where you are now. And usually now, talking to people who are around people who are divorced, before we even think and start passing judgment, by the time people decide to get divorced, they've gone through a lot of planning and thinking in their lives and in our minds about how they could save the situation, how they could save the marriage. So by the time they get there, it's after a long struggle. And so because of that lengthy struggle, because of all the attempts they've made to try and salvage the situation, to change the situation, and they did not succeed, they did not work, and they eventually get divorced. It is a loss, because sometimes it feels like they failed. Sometimes they feel like they failed. Sometimes people who are divorced, they're really hard on themselves and saying, I failed. I especially if you seem to succeed in every other area of your life, it does hit you hard. So that is a loss. And for us, we may not be sympathetic to the person who filed for divorce, but it does not mean that it's less of a loss to them because they filed for it. Sometimes we find ourselves sympathizing with the person who was the respondent, the person who was divorced by the other one. And we find ourselves sympathizing, at least this one wanted it to stay, wanted to continue. And even for that one, it's a loss because they didn't want to see it happen. But for us on the outside, it's usually easier to sympathize with the one who was divorced than the one who filed for divorce. I want to say today, it's a loss to everyone. It's a loss to both of them. And because it's a loss to both of them, our love and compassion cannot be limited to the person who did not file for divorce. It has to be for everyone. And for somebody who is there wondering, have they failed God by allowing their marriage to come to an end? I want to say, Paul simply says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us have tried our righteousnesses like filthy rags. All of us have tried our best at different things, and we have not always succeeded at the things we wanted to do. There are things we wanted, standards that God has placed that we wanted to reach that we couldn't. And thank God for grace, that the fact that we don't always succeed at the things we want, succeed at what we believe He wants for us, that He doesn't write us off. We thank God for grace, because had it not been for grace, we would easily be written off as people who have failed, who are worthless. But that is not the case. So it is that kind of loss that we have. And so even when you have to introduce yourself, you introduce yourself, you used to be so and so or married, and I was at a meeting of AAA Adventist Accreditation Association. We were visiting schools in Lesotho, a school in Lesotho, to do the accreditation process. Now we would sit in the room when we start out and introduce ourselves, which is very normal for every time there is a meeting of that nature. So people are introducing themselves, and we invariably include the fact that I'm married. We joke around, I'm married to one wife, I'm married to a beautiful wife, we have so many children. It's part of the introduction, and it may have been part of the introduction before. However, you will find that even as you used to do that, even as you used to introduce yourself like that, now that things have changed, your introduction changes. You'll be in a room where people are introducing themselves, talking about their spouses and their children, and your introduction used to be like that, but now it has to change. It has to be different. And we have to come to terms with that, because it's not always something that we are emotionally ready for. And sometimes it takes us by surprise, because you find yourself in a situation where you did not think you'd have to introduce yourself, and boom, you introduce yourself, and the person before you mentioned their family. The person before you mentioned their kids and their spouse. And here you are, and of course, people usually with a very warm smile, receive and laugh and clap for the person who's introduced themselves and mentioned their spouses. Now it's your turn. And you're going to introduce yourself. And what goes through your mind is, do I state the fact that I'm divorced? How do I put it? How do I phrase it? Do I just leave it out and talk about myself? Do I bring in the kids? If I bring in the kids, will it not have a question about where the other spouse, the husband or the wife? And those things go through your mind as you try to figure out for the first time, how do you introduce yourself? after you've gotten divorced. So it is a loss. It's a loss of that form of identity of who you are. And it's something that it's not just a loss, but it also comes, it's also a change that we have to embrace. We have to embrace the change that, yes, it's different. It may not have been what you want. It may not have been something that you're comfortable with, but it's something that you have to embrace. It's important to emphasize that it's one of the things that people have to embrace, because we've seen people who've gone for a very long time refusing to accept that there's been a change. And they're not embracing the change, and it messes them up emotionally. It's something that we have to embrace and find a way in which you are going to be okay with this self, that this is who you are. Yes, you've tried it, and this is how it worked out. This is how it panned out. It did not last as long as you intended it to last. It was not the kind of marriage you wanted it to last. This is where you are now. Whether you're the one who filed for divorce or didn't, but just to accept that this is where you are now, you gave it your best shot. Now, the phrase best shot will vary from time to time. There will be instances where you'll feel you gave it your best shot, and there'll be instances where you feel, maybe I didn't, maybe I should have done A, B, C, D, maybe I didn't do as much as I could have, but this is where you are, to accept that this is it, and to just be forgiving of ourselves, to say, some of the things you could have done that you didn't do, sometimes we didn't do them because we thought we had time. Sometimes they just didn't occur to us. Sometimes we didn't think that we needed to, but this is where we are now. And you then have to find a way, a positive spin to how you're going to introduce yourself. And I found some very creative ways in which people have introduced themselves. I was at an event where people had to introduce themselves, and some lady stood up and introduced herself, who she was, where she was from, and what she does. And then she said, I served my time for 10 years, and then I'm out now. And then people laughed. And I thought, okay, fine. That's an interesting spin to how she presented it. And so that's it. That's how she chose to present it. And some people decide not to. Some people simply say, I have these children, my ex-husband or ex-wife, but whatever has moved on, or we are co-parenting. I remember listening to somebody who, when they were introducing themselves, said, I'm sorry, I'm co-parenting so many children with my ex-wife or ex-husband. And in instances like those, you found something that gels with you, with who you are, in terms of you now accepting that this is who we are, this is where you are, and you are now accepting this change, this loss of a marital status, but it's a different marital status. Now, there are instances where someone is going to say, but I wanted to get out because I was in an abusive marriage. Yes, and in those instances, even though you may be happy to be out of an abusive relationship, you still did not want to be divorced. What you wanted was to be happily married. And even if someone says you should be happy, at least you're divorced, at least you're no longer that happy in that abusive marriage. Yes, you're not longer in an abusive marriage. However, it doesn't mean that you wanted to be in an abusive marriage to begin with. You wanted to be happily married. And so it still is a loss, even though you leave an abusive marriage, because the idea you had was, I wanted to be happily married, and I wanted to be married for keeps. And that has not happened. It may be a consequence of abuse. But so as you mourn the loss of the marriage, of the dream of the marriage that you had, you also embrace the fact that you're now in a safer space, and you are able to live differently and a better life because you're no longer in an abusive setup. So it remains that kind of loss. Secondly, the status is not just that. It includes the fact that you are known as so-and-so spouse. It does. Everywhere you know, and generally people will I've seen how we sometimes refer to people who are divorced as so-and-so's wife, so-and-so's husband. So you're known as that. And because you're known as that, and generally the people who knew you as that person may not always know how to handle you now that you're no longer so-and-so's spouse. And you still have to figure out for yourself how life is like without being so-and-so's spouse, so-and-so's husband, or so-and-so's wife. Because a number of people, depending on how long you've been married, there will probably be a number of people who've known you over the years as a couple, who've known you as so-and-so's husband or so-and-so's wife. And so that's part of the identity that you lose, especially if you are one of those couples that we saw, that we liked, that you look good together. You know, you seem to gel well. We don't always know what's happening behind closed doors, but you seem to be okay together. You seem to be one of those couples that are, you know, that look like they'll go the distance. And now here you are, you're no longer so-and-so's wife, no longer so-and-so's husband. And that's gone. That's gone. And you kind of have to accept it and embrace it, because it's going to help you to get over it. It's going to help you to move on. It will take time. It'll help you to move on, but it's important that we accept that we've lost a particular status, but it's changed. And depending on the nature of the marriage, the status you may be moving into may be something that's better than what you had before, but it will still include some level of loss. And there's a social standing that we also have to, that changes. Because generally we have always valued marriage, particularly in the church space. We've always valued marriage. We've always wanted to raise marriage as the ideal for almost everybody, which should not necessarily be the case, but we've generally done that. This is the ideal. Marriage is the ideal, and we'd like everybody to get married. We've done that. But part of what has happened because we did that is we created a hierarchy, a social standing hierarchy. And it was not even, I'm not even sure if it was intentional. If it was, then it was probably a very bad intention. Maybe the people wanted to keep people married, I don't know. But we've invariably created a hierarchy in social standing. And married people usually sit at the top of that hierarchy. That's how we talk about them. That's how we relate with them. That's how we treat them when we want to elect people, when we want to put people in positions of responsibility, people we look up to. We generally put married people at the top of the hierarchy. And for some reason, even those who were unhappily married, for some reason, find their way in that top area of this hierarchy. And that's where they sit. And then just below those people are people who are considered, heroes of marriage. These are usually people who are widowed. It doesn't matter how long the marriage was, but the fact that you lost a spouse, there's a sense that you lived through your vows, till death do us part. You made it, and that's where you are. And so you have this, revered status, and below that it's single people, and then after single people we have divorced people. Now the funny thing is that no, it's not written anywhere, it's not prescribed anywhere, but it's in the way we treat people. And so that social standing kicks in, and depending on how sensitive people are, and depending on how considerate people are, because the more considerate you are, the flatter the situation is. But the less considerate we are, we actually follow that hierarchy, that social standing hierarchy, where we treat you, your life changes just like that. Your status in our eyes changes just like that. And even though you may have been someone we held in high regard, just like that, it changes. And you find that you wonder, but what happened? I'm the same person. But the way you've been treated, the way people are relating to you is different. And it's one of those things we have to get used to. We have to adjust to. It's a change in social standing. And people see you differently. People you used to socialize with. Now they see you differently. Now other couples that you were friends with as couples, now you wonder if people are still as comfortable with you now that you're no longer coupled with somebody else. And people have indicated that, the ladies have indicated that you get divorced, and all of a sudden the married people who you used to hang out with no longer want to hang out with you. You seem to be a threat, someone who's probably available to their husband. And so that change happens, and happens drastically. And you expected people to treat you as the same Mandla Lopondwana you were before. But now that you are divorced, it's different. They're dealing with you as a divorced Mandla Lopondwana. And you're shocked, but why would you do this? Why would you do this? Because I'm here. It's me. It's the same person. The only thing that has changed is my marital status. But that's what we've seen happen. And as a result, part of the things we have to get used to when we talk about this loss and the change that comes with divorce is that your status changes. Your status changes because now in the eyes of other people, you are no longer the person you were before you got divorced. And it's something that you must embrace. The sooner you embrace it, the sooner you are able to rebuild your life as this new person. So this is one of the things that have to change. Now, another thing that changes, one of the things that change that come with your marriage is your family. Because you had a particular view, a version of what your family is. It was you, your spouse, and your children. This was your family, and everybody else was extended family, including both sides of your in-laws. But as soon as divorce kicks in, your vision of your family, the picture of your family, who your family is, changes. And you're no longer able to paint the same picture you used to paint before. So because of that, you have to accept that the family has changed. The family dynamics have changed. And because that has changed, you no longer have what you had before. You've lost the family you had. You have a different one now. You've lost the family. It was you, your spouse, and your children. You've lost that family. You may or may not get it again, but right now you don't have it. And you have to accept the change that it's probably you alone and your wife is probably there with the kids, or the husband is there with the kids, or it's you with the kids and the other spouse has to be the other parent who comes to visit the kids, or the kids will go and visit them. So it's a different kind of family that you now have than the family you have. And going forward, if you're going to be married to somebody else, you're going to have a blended family. You may never have thought of yourself as being in a blended family, or you may never have wanted one. But as soon as your divorce gets concluded, blended family becomes a real possibility for you. You then have to sit and think that I have a child, I have 2 children. If I'm going to marry somebody else, chances are they may have a child or children. And if that's the case, we are going to be in a blended family. So you're no longer going to have that family you may have had before you got married, of you and your spouse and your children. Now you have to know that if you're going to think about falling in love again and being with somebody else, it's going to be in the context of a blended family. Now, your life as you knew it. And this is the interesting thing that usually affects people who got divorced and have not yet accepted the fact that they're divorced, and they try their level best to keep the life that they had. You find that the life you had, more often than not, except for people who are uber rich, whose lives they can finance multiple lives, but generally people are able to finance their lives for the incomes that they have. This is the income that we have as husband and wife. And because this is the income that they have as husband and wife, this is how they're financing their life. As soon as one person's income walks away, and you are now on your own, and you are living on your own income, or a divorce settlement, there are certain things you can no longer afford that you may have been able to afford before. You may have been able to afford a particular house in a particular neighborhood. But now that you've split, and you're gonna the incomes you had before that financed that lifestyle now have to finance 2 lives in 2 different vicinities. You'll find that you're no longer able to afford living in that house. You can't afford living there. You may need to change cars. Kids may need to change schools. The restaurants you were able to go to, you are unable to go to anymore. You find that the holidays you used to have, you're unable to go to those holidays anymore. So things change. Your life as you knew it changes. The things you were able to do, the people you used to connect with, you're not able to connect with again. Things you did not have to think about, you now have to think about. Now you find that sometimes you sit and you feel, I generally would like to keep my life the way it is. And sometimes we feel we do not want to disrupt our lives for the sake of the children. And you try and hang on to it. And this is where we get to accumulate a lot of debt. Sometimes we can accumulate a lot of debt because we're trying to hold on to what we have. Sometimes we can get into bitter fights, trying to hold on to a house that you can't afford, but simply because you want the drastic changes in the lives of the kids. And the fight itself, the bitterness in the form of the settlement that you should be giving this. After all, I did this and that for you. So it becomes a difficult thing. Also, because when you're somebody's husband, you kind of have a sense that you're this number 1 person in her life. Or you're somebody's wife, you're this number 1 person in his life. Even in instances where there are affairs on the side, on the part of your spouse, you generally hold that position of being the spouse. Then you get divorced, it kind of gets shaken. It gets worse when the person starts moving on, because the initial reaction to being replaced is not always a pleasant one. But as soon as we accept that this is what's happening in my life, this is what's happening in my life, and get to embrace it, which takes time. And I would encourage anybody who's going through it right now to seriously consider therapy, seriously consider a counselor, because they will help you process your feelings. They will help you process what you're going through, and they will help you rebuild your life. They will help you, guide you in that process. And you cannot underestimate the value of a counselor, especially when you're going through a period like this. Now, prayer doesn't take the place of a medical doctor or a dentist, nor of a counselor. Prayer has its place, but you don't pray away your toothache. You don't pray away your heart attack. You don't pray away your kidney problems. In the same way you don't pray away all of those things, you do not pray away mental health. It's something that you take it to a professional, and the professional will assist. It doesn't mean you don't have faith in God. It doesn't mean you don't love God. It doesn't mean you don't trust God. It simply means that God has given us professionals to handle these things. And prayer has its place, but prayer has never really been meant to take the place of things we can do as human beings. So I would generally strongly encourage anyone who's going through it to consider a counselor. It doesn't mean you're messed up. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean there's something fundamentally wrong with you. It simply means that there is an expert who can handle this. The same way we take our cars for service to an expert. Now, when I take my car for service, it doesn't mean that I'm weak. It doesn't mean that I don't know how to handle my life. It simply means that there's an expert who handles this. When I go to a dentist, it's because there's an expert who handles it. When you go to a salon, there's an expert who does this. When you go to somebody because you've got a pain in your back, there's an expert. When you have problems with your eyes, and you go and get them tested. It's because there's an expert who does it. Now, no one is going to tell you if you can't see properly, pray and you're going to see. No one's going to tell you that. Pray for your car. You don't need to take it for service. Same applies with mental health. Prayer and fasting does not take the place of therapy. Therapy has its place the same way a dentist has its own place. The same way every other professional who helps us in our lives has their place. So does someone who's going to help you with mental health. And there's no need for us to be ashamed of it. Generally, people who attach a stigma, who attach a stigma to being assisted by mental health professionals have not yet fully grasped the assistance you get there. You know, this idea we used to take pride in the fact that, you know, when you've got a pain in the leg or back, you just put some Vaseline, you know, and you tell, I'm going to be fine, I'm going to walk it off. Yeah, you walk it off until it becomes a major complication that drastically affects your life. Today, we all know the sensible thing to do when you feel an unexplained and unusual pain, you get it checked out by a doctor. Doesn't mean you're weak. It simply means right now you're smart. Same thing. If you hear a funny sound in your car, you don't say, no, I'll drive it until it shuts down. You take it to a mechanic, you get it checked out. And when it's checked out, it gets fixed, nipped in the bud. The same thing applies when it comes to mental health. We take ourselves to the professionals the same way we do with every other medical person. So please do not let anybody mislead you to think that somehow prayer and fasting and reading the Bible will take the place of therapy. It does not. Therapists and counselors are healthcare professionals who have their place in life, whose work is being blessed by the Lord, the same way the Lord blesses the work of nurses, He blesses the work of doctors. So I'm really, really strong on saying people must find therapists, and we do not need to be ashamed. And whoever thinks there's something wrong with you because you saw a therapist, they just need more education. Forgive them. They do not know what they're talking about or doing. So that is it. The first thing that we lose and we require changes in is our marriage. The second one is your dreams and your plans. Dreams and plans. Depending on how long you've been married, at some point, if you've been married for a while, you've made retirement plans. This is how you're going to retire. This is where you'd like to retire. This is what you'd like to do retirement. Some people want to travel when they retire. Some people want to move to the coast when they retire. They want to change countries. As soon as you get divorced, those plans they're gone. They may have been beautiful plans, they're gone. Some people build their homes and they extend them. They make them comfortable because this is where they're going to retire. This is their dream home. They're fixing it up for the long haul. And then you get divorced and that's it. You have to split. And depending on whether you have to move out of the house at least or change your retirement plans, and depending on whether you married in or out of community of property, your pension funds are going to be affected. Your savings for retirement are going to be affected. If you had bought property whose rental income is going to assist you with the retirement plans, that may have to be sold or split. And that alone changes your retirement plans. It changes your dreams. And it's okay to mourn the loss of plans because they're an important part of our lives. Remember, our plans for tomorrow, our bright plans for tomorrow are part of what gives us a reason to wake up in the morning, part of what gives us hope. And so we lose that. But in the process of accepting that you've lost the retirement plans that you had, you then have to accept that it's an opportunity for you to actually make new plans, have new plans and try something else and try something different. And say, I may need to downsize. I may need to make a lateral move. I may need to make plans I didn't have to make before, but this is it. This is life. I've lost those plans and retirement plans. I just have to change them. And as soon as you accept that and start making new plans, accept that you've lost those plans. It allows you to start making new plans, to start thinking about making new plans, start thinking about a different retirement plan. Even if you may have thought I'll retire at 55, boom, divorce happens, you retire, you realize I may not be able to retire at the 55. I thought I'd be able to retire it. So that's part of what we lose and part of what changes in our lives. Also, our dreams for our children's upbringing, depending on how old the children are. Remember, children of all ages get affected by divorce, whether they're young or adults. Children or adults, they get affected by divorce, but it affects them differently depending on which stage of their lives they're in. But if your children were still young and you had a particular dream for their upbringing, and now you getting a divorce, and you have to change places where you stay, you have to change the lifestyle. Instead of dropping off from school, they probably have to take public transport or walk to school. All of those, these are things, these are the dream you had for your own children's upbringing changes. And it sometimes hits people very hard, particularly mothers, because they had a particular dream, they had an attachment to how they want their kids to live, how they want their kids to grow up, the kind of environment they want for their children. And because that's what they wanted, you have to mourn the loss of that particular dream as well. And it's one of the adjustments that people have to make after the divorce is finalized, because now it's going to be different schools, different way you're going to live. If you had someone who used to be at home to clean out, help with at home with the cleaning and running of the house and cooking, that probably you can't afford that person anymore. If you are the one staying at home doing it for your children, you may not be able to afford to stay at home and do that for the children anymore. Changes, and the changes are profound. For someone who's on the outside looking, they may think that it's something insignificant. But for you as the person who has to give up on this particular dream, it's a big thing. And you also had plans for your own home. You also plans for your own home that you may have to give up on. And it's part of the changes that come with it that you have to adjust to. And people can sometimes say, but it's reality, for heaven's sake, you should have known this was going to happen. Yes. Yes, it's true, but I want us to think about it in the context of sometimes you have a parent who's ill, or a sibling who's ill, or a spouse who's ill, or a child who's ill, and then you're told that the person is terminally ill, and you can see the person is terminally ill, and they eventually pass away. You could be shocked at the fact that they've passed away, or you could say, but we saw it coming and so on. But then on the day of the funeral, for some reason, it hits you in a different way. You knew it was coming. You saw it coming a long way off. You probably made plans for it. But when the reality hits that it's happening, it can hit you in a way you did not anticipate. Now, if we could understand that for people who've lost a loved one through death, we should be able to understand that sometimes the dreams and the plans that we had for our lives and our families, even though we may have seen it coming, that they're going to change, when they actually happen, it hits you in a different way. And it requires the same compassion that we give to the people who've lost family members through death. It requires the same understanding to simply say, I wouldn't react the way you are reacting. You'd say that's because you're not in that situation. Or you could be saying, I did not react like that, but give the person room and space to react in their own way, because they've lost something. And it is a loss to lose your dreams and to lose your plans. And then their friends, in-laws and events. Now, you may lose some friends, especially if the bulk of your friends were friends you made as a couple. And you'll find that as you finalize your divorce, sometimes friends pick sides. Sometimes they pick sides. Sometimes they hear one side of the story and they're not interested in the other side of the story, depending on who told them what. Sometimes these were your spouse's friend, you became friends with them through him or through her, and then now that it has ended, they go back and gravitate to the original friend. So you may lose some friends. It's something that you may need to accept. And it doesn't mean that the people are evil. It simply means that we're not always trained on how to handle it. We don't always know how to handle it, what's the best way to handle it. And so sometimes our initial reactions are not the best reactions. And you do feel a loss and you wonder, so-and-so, I mean, I never fought with so-and-so, but why is this? I did not expect this from them, but it does happen. So it's one of those things we lose and have to accept that the people who are very close friends of yours may not be close friends anymore, but you'll keep some. You may be able to keep some, you may be able to keep most, depending on what happened in the marriage and depending on how it's coming to an end and whether or not the other spouse decides to remain in the same space. You're both in the same spaces and forcing people to choose, making situations uncomfortable. Sometimes one of you just walks away, pulls out of the whole circle of friends and starts new groups of friends and leaves these friends with you, but you may lose some friends, and that's one of the adjustments that have. And that's one of the things that make the life after divorce a bit lonely. The fact that you may have lost your friends. Yes, the fact that you've lost a person is a factor, but the fact that you've lost friends, you've lost companions, that can make it lonely. That can make it lonely. Secondly, water does get thicker than blood from time to time. Now you may wonder, what do you mean water can get thicker than blood? The old saying, blood is thicker than water, The full saying is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It was for people who signed a blood covenant where they would cut themselves and mix blood and say, the blood of this covenant is stronger than the womb, the water of the womb you share with your siblings. In other words, you'll be more loyal to us than you are to your own biological siblings, your own brother and sister from the same, with whom you share a womb. So that's the original statement. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. But in this case, you'll find that when people do get divorced, you got along with the in-laws, you got along famously with them. They were a great group of people, and you had no qualms with them, you had no fights with them. Boom, divorce occurs. And all of a sudden, they gravitate towards their sibling. And here you find that, man, the water of the womb has become thick. And they have now moved on to their sibling, their sister, or to their brother. And you lose people you got along with, you lose people you were close with, you lose good relationships. And beyond that, you lose events. There used to be family events. You may not be able to go there anymore. I know in my family, we've got an annual reunion at the end of the year where we come together. And then if the divorce then you'd find yourself not being able to attend, or feel that you're not invited or you're not welcome. And it's something that you enjoyed. You had your own space, you played your own role. And so these are changes that happen. And these are some of the changes that can make divorce hit hard during the holiday season. They do, because that's when people have migrated, have gone to your families. That's when the music that's playing on the radio or television, it speaks to families. This is when programs on television and movies are generally about family time, and you feel that you don't have this family. So it can hit that way. And so this is part of the loss that you have. But it brings about a change in your life. It brings about a change in life because the changes that are there, that are brought about by the changes that are brought about by divorce, the changes that are brought about by divorce, you have to accept that they are there. And the reason why it's important to accept is because you need to be able to move on at your own time, hopefully working with it with your therapist or counselor. But for you to be able to chart your way forward, you need to accept that this has happened and these are the changes that have been brought about by the divorce. And so even if you're losing friends, you're losing some in-laws, you're losing events that were special to you, there are people who are singing in a group with their spouse. And probably there were 3, 4 couples singing together in a musical group, and now one of them gets divorced, and you realize that you may not be able to continue singing in this couples group because it was for couples, and you lose something that you enjoyed, you lose the music that you enjoyed, and so a lot of changes happen because we've lost the spouse. Now, in addition to the fact that we've lost a lot of things, there's a bright side to it. And the bright side to it is that it's an opportunity to start afresh. It's a fresh start. You may not be as young as you were when you had your first start, but this is a fresh start. You are able to start and decide what do you want to do with your life. It's also an opportunity to reinvent yourself because you've lived that life and you are able to assess and wonder, do I want that or you want something different? And you do that. You get to reinvent yourself. It becomes an opportunity to become a new person, a different person, especially if you've sat back and evaluated what have you done in your life. What did you get right? What did you get wrong in the previous relationship? What would you do differently in your previous life? What did you, not by previous life, I don't mean reincarnation, I mean when you were married. What did you do right? What did you not do right? What did you forego because you were married that you would like to pursue now? And you do that. And it has happened that a number of people have found the confidence because they were able to survive the marriage. That's if it was an unpleasant marriage or an abusive marriage. They've been able to survive the divorce process because it can be very traumatic itself. And after they've gone through that and they've stabilized and things they've reached some form of equilibrium, they have a confidence to face anything because they feel, if I could survive that, I could survive anything. So there is that bright side to it, is that it presents an opportunity for you to start something else. But these are some of the changes that come with being divorced. Now, I'm hoping that the person who's not divorced who listened to us today will be able to approach anyone who is divorced, who is able to approach anyone who's going through a divorce with a sense of understanding and compassion, with a sense of this person is going through a very difficult thing that I may not understand. And before we are very quick to condemn and say very hurtful things to people who are going through a divorce or who are divorced already, it is important for us to remember that God hates divorce, the act of divorce, but has never hated people who are divorced or people who are divorcing or children of parents who are divorced. It has never been the case. And the Lord has not sent us, has not given us the mission, nor the task or responsibility in the church to lambast people who are going through difficult times and have made difficult choices. That's not our responsibility. And everybody who has gone through a divorce almost everybody, because there's that group that actually wants to do for monetary gain, but almost everybody who goes through a divorce has tried their level best to make it work. And in life, the last thing you want, after you've tried everything to keep this marriage intact, after you've tried everything to make sure that it works, after you've given it your best shot, the last thing you want is somebody who has no idea what happened in the marriage trying to tell you what you could have done. And so do they already feel bad about it? Of course, they already feel bad about it. Do they already feel that they probably disappointed themselves or their family members or their children or somebody else? Of course, they probably feel that way. And the last thing they want is for you to add to it. What we can do instead is to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, because if we were in that space, we would want to be treated differently. So whatever righteous indignation you might feel because people have not been able to stay married, that righteous indignation has no space really in church. And it's not a representation of God, because if it was a representation of God, if God actually hated divorced people, then John 3:16 would have been, for God so loved the world except for people who are divorced, that he gave his only begotten son. But because he loves everybody, including us who may be in marriages that are horrible, but we've just been able to keep them intact. Some of us are in so horrible situations, but because other people don't know about it, we can keep it under wraps. God knows and sees everything. And the best thing we can do for one another is to show one another love and care and compassion, because that's what we're called to do. And as we show each other that compassion, we show each other, one another that love, we get to experience the church as the body of Christ. The arms of Christ that hug you, the hands of Christ that wipe the tears from your eyes, the ears of Christ that listen even when we don't fully understand, but just because you need somebody to talk to. That's what we are called to do. So it's the act of divorcing somebody that God hates, but it has never been the person. And anyone who suggests that because God hates divorce, he automatically hates the divorcee, man, you've so missed the gospel, because if that was the case, then God's hatred for sin would equally apply to the sinner. And there would be no hope for salvation for us. And we thank God that he can hate sin with every fiber of his being and still love the sinner to a point where he'd give his only begotten son to die for me, the sinner, so that I may have eternal life. And so everybody who has been divorced, do not ever wonder if God loves you. Do not ever wonder if you've done something so bad or so wrong that probably God is iffy about you. God has been loving and caring towards people, and towards people who've done horrible things. And that's a puzzling thing about grace, because there are certain people who wish the Lord would smite. He doesn't because of grace. And trust me, being divorced, I don't think it's on the list of things that God would want to smite you for. He loves us. He cares for us. Even when we don't live up to our own expectations, God loves us with an everlasting love, the Bible says, an everlasting love. Now, John, in 1 John chapter 4, he says two things. In chapter 4, verse 8, he talks about somebody who says he loves God and yet he hates his own brother. That's not true, because God is love. And then in verse 16, he says, this is how we know that we know God. God is love, and whoever dwells in love dwells in God, and God dwells in him. And that's our response when people get divorced. If as a divorced person, you have not felt the love, that kind of love from the church, if you have not felt that kind of love for us, the leaders of the church, pastors in the church, elders, members, board members, if you haven't felt that love, I'm terribly, terribly sorry, because the church is one place you should have felt that love, in spite of what you did in your marriage. Because sometimes people may feel, but you were the wrong party in the marriage. In spite of what happened in your marriage, the church is the one place you should have felt that love. It's the one place where you should have experienced God's care. It's the one place where you should have experienced God's grace and forgiveness, and the sense of, look, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, that everybody's righteousness is like filthy rags. If there's one place you should have felt that you are amongst good company when things go terribly wrong, it should have been the church. If you didn't experience that, I'm terribly, terribly sorry. And I really hope that someone close to you in a church where you are will give you the love you should have experienced from the church. With that, I hope that we'll be able to grow in love and grow in our lives as we experience life, especially for those who are experiencing after divorce. But for those of us who are not divorced, we have divorced people in our lives, in our churches. Please, let's marinate them with love. Everybody needs this love. It's a tough world. We need the love of God. And that love of God is so beautiful when experienced through the words and the actions of his people. Amen.